Great to have you along on this Sunday morning. Once again, it's time for the Hawaii Media Public Access programming available via our 5 Oahu Hawaii Media radio stations and 5 Kauai Hawaii Media radio stations, also online at hawaiistream.fm and the app at Live 365 if you're out and about away from the radio. A big discussion on something that is starting to make headway again as far as the news, and we'll see what goes with some new happenings in D.C. come next year. It's the Jones Act. The Jones Act, it came about in 1920, and it's a requirement that all cargo transported between U.S. ports to be on ships that are U.S. flagged. All right, and there's more into that, but we'll let the two people joining me from Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, yes, two people today. We're going to get a double dip of knowledge from a couple of very knowledgeable individuals from the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii who have been on top of this and have a great paper you can check out at the grassrootsinstitute.org, grassrootsinstitute.org. Joining me first to say hello would be Mark Coleman, the Managing Editor and Communications Director. Mark, good morning to you. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning, Johnny. Good morning to Honolulu.
And for multiple times, he's really come about and to be a great researcher, and he brings forth his information to make it easy to understand. Policy researcher from Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, Jonathan Hilton. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning to you too, Johnny, and looking forward to this discussion.
Let's see who takes over with the very first question, where we go. It can be complicated for some people. I'm sure you guys do your best to make it easy. You just put out another policy brief. You two combine your efforts on that about the National Maritime Employment and the Jones Act. So before we get to that takeaway, can you remind the listeners, I gave a little bit of a synopsis of that, what the Jones Act is about?
Sure, I'm happy to lead off here.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Jones Act is basically a law that says if you're going to move any sort of goods, so imagine you're shipping a car from two U.S. ports, you have to move that on a ship that is built in the United States, that is flying a U.S. flag, and that has a mostly U.S. crew and is mostly owned by U.S. citizens or companies. So if you're moving that car from Los Angeles here to Honolulu, then you're going to have to comply with that law. Anything
to add, Mark?
Well, only that's the law that creates all the problems that we now have in the American maritime shipping industry. Ships that are too expensive, labor crews, operational expenses that are really high, and extra costs for consumers that we wouldn't otherwise have if not for this law, which affects mostly areas of the country such as Hawaii and Alaska that are highly dependent on waterborne transportation for most of their imports. So, yeah, that's why we're interested in this. It's a really weird law. It's not a tariff in a sense that, things get taxed when they're brought into the country. It's called a non-tariff law. It restricts competition in an industry, and that shows up as in most cases where competition is restricted by the government with higher prices for consumers.
And that's basically why you two did this research. Where can they find that before we continue your latest work? Just at grassrootsinstitute.org, or did you put it out for the general public elsewhere?
Yeah, that's the easiest place to find it. If you go to our homepage on our website, grassrootsinstitute.org, it'll be right there, and you can click and read to the whole thing.
And are you going to do any, Q&A sessions with the public on this to kind of inform them a little bit more, not just as far as the reading aspect of it, but also in person so they can ask questions? Is that going to be in the works for Oahu?
We haven't talked about that, actually, Johnny. I don't think that this was that kind of study.
Okay.
We actually were aiming this more at a national audience. We sent this out to all the maritime publications in the country and all the ones we're aware of, and to most of the leading, big city newspapers and national newspapers, Wall Street Journal, and so on.
Okay.
I can't say the response has been overwhelming or anything, but we did think it was of national significance because this looks at waterborne transportation and related industries nationwide, not just Hawaii. So it wasn't really something that it seemed to us, to me anyway, that should be about Hawaii. I don't think an event in Hawaii related to this would was up our alley at this time, at least anyway.
Okay, guys, what's the overall trend of jobs in U.S. water transportation?
Yeah, that's the real crux of the report. A lot of people who support the Jones Act make the claim that the Jones Act supports thousands and thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs even. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the reason we did this report was to take on this claim and sort of look at the how many jobs the Jones Act might support and what the overall trend has been. And the overall trend has been flat. I mean, if you look from 1990 to 2023, which is the data that we had access to, this is data from the federal government, it's the NAICS, which is if anyone is familiar with economics, is a pretty common way of classifying jobs. And so looking at all of those jobs that are
North American Industry Classification System is what it was called.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. But the jobs that are related to waterborne transportation have declined by 2.6% from 1990 to 2023. So, you could say it's declined a little bit. It's certainly been stagnant. So, there's not an argument to be made that the Jones Act is, drastically increased maritime employment, because the numbers certainly don't suggest that that's the case.
And more specifically, the Jones Act doesn't really affect the entire waterborne transportation industry. It specifically applies to just certain segments, and mainly indirectly shipbuilders, because you have to use U.S.-built ships, and then also the crews, that the mariners on the ships, and the companies that own those ships. So that if you factor out everybody else in the waterborne industry, navigational, services, marine cargo handling, there's so many other categories. The sectors directly affected by the Jones Act, they've actually gone down quite a bit more than 2.6%. And the way we've been looking at it, this 2.3 figure is actually, or 2.6 figure is actually kind of a more complementary to, if you assume that all waterborne industry jobs are Jones Act jobs, which we don't, then that would make it look like it hasn't had that much of an effect. But in fact, Jones Act related jobs particularly have been affected more so than the whole entire industry.
Jonathan, anything to add on that? Because it sounds like the claims. Go ahead.
I'll just look at one specific thing. So if we look at the sector coastal and Great Lakes freight transportation, right? So coastal, that's going to be, maybe you're moving something from California up to Washington, or from Texas to New England. The jobs in that sector
or from LA to Hawaii.
Yeah, or from LA to Hawaii. Jobs in that sector down by 20% of 1990 to 2023. So that's a sector that's directly related to the Jones Act. It's less related than something like, as Mark mentioned, cargo handling, right? That's not the transportation of goods. That's just unloading goods. So the takeaway is really that the Jones Act has not contributed to the major growth of U.S. maritime over the past 30 years.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So what you're... go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, considering that the United States has thousands of miles of coastline in the Great Lakes, all up and down the east and west coast, the out here to Hawaii, up there to Alaska, over there to Puerto Rico, all throughout the Gulf, and yet, water transportation in America is like only 3% of all transportation costs, all modes of transportation. It's 3.7% or something ridiculously low considering the potential. And what is holding it back? And our conclusion would be the protectionist maritime jobs such as the Jones Act. That's not the only protectionist maritime job law There's also restrictions very similar to the Jones Act regarding passenger vessels, dredging vessels, towing vessels, and all those combined are really putting the noose on, really strangling the industry from growing. Worldwide, we're like a minuscule portion of the worldwide maritime sector in global shipping. We are definitely not a world maritime power in terms of commercial global shipping. Our shipyards are dropping off like flies, and most of their work is for military contracts. There's like one ship a year now they're building for the commercial sector. So this is why we're concerned. We had a cartoon a couple of years ago on our website back in January 2022, which was hilarious, by our cartoonist Dave Swan. And it was, we keep hearing from the Jones Act lobby that they provide 650,000 jobs. I provide 660,000 jobs. We had this picture of this record on a record player, supposedly by the Jones Act's greatest hits, and the lyrics are going, I provide 650,000 jobs. I provide 660,000 jobs. And the dad is looking at his kid and pointing at the record player, and he's going, that record is stuck again. Anybody know how to make it stop?
Okay.
And so we looked into this claim of 650,000 jobs. That's basically what this report was about. We got tired of hearing about this number because it was just, not that long ago that they were claiming it was 500,000 jobs. And before that, it was like 125,000 jobs. I forget what that actual first number was. But, in 20 years, it was 124,000 jobs in 1997. And that allegedly owed their existence to the law. And then 20 years later, it's 500,000, and now it's 650,000. And so they're saying, based on a study that showed about 98,000 direct jobs to the Jones Act that were directly related, that you had roughly 500,000 more, even more than 500,000 more jobs that are related to this law. So we wanted to look into that, and the only way we could reasonably do that, Jonathan did a great job digging up this data and analyzing it, and I helped with the writing and looking at it and talking to him about it. But we found that we looked at all the maritime jobs that could reasonably be factored into, the waterborne transportation industry, and including related jobs. Now, to what extent, then you get into this issue about the multiplier. There's an economic multiplier. Your job creates a job down the line, kind of, or at least stimulates or has an effect on a job down the line. Like, for example, shipbuilding might help the steel industry, but how you make that connection is problematic. And there aren't official numbers that can be applied to each of these sectors, whether it's a multiplier of 2 or 3 or 4. But in this case, we have a multiplier of like 6.8, which is really extreme. And we just question the whole. But the thing is, the study that they used to come up with this information has never been made public. And that was another thing we wanted to bring out in our study, which was, where did you come up with these numbers? In fact, they attributed about 98,000 jobs to the Jones Act industry. We think now it's probably more like 80,000. I think they attributed about 43,000 to shipbuilding and 53,000 or something like that to other Jones Act related jobs. We think those numbers are all down a bit more. Shipbuilding in America, like I said, isn't even really mostly about commercial shipping anymore, at least not for the ocean-going ships. So that was our point, and I think we've thrown the gauntlet down. I don't know if they're going to pick it up and run with it or try to respond, but I think we've shown pretty well that the numbers are really questionable, and this should give pause to lawmakers, particularly in Congress, because it's a federal law, that maybe this 650,000 jobs claim is not real, and maybe you could reconsider about how allegedly important this job is. In fact, we think it's holding back the industry. But if you got rid of it, there'd be more there'd be more jobs, in general.
So it sounds, Mark, like if the Jones Act were reformed or repealed, let's say tomorrow, lots of people wouldn't end up losing their jobs in the hundreds of thousands. If you're talking about in the 90,000s, what have you, even lower than that. I mean, you're saying that the bottom line, I guess, would be, would a lot of people lose their jobs if this thing was repealed or reformed, say, tomorrow?
Right. Yes, right. The shipping industry exists separate of the Jones Act. They like to call these things Jones Act jobs. They're talking about 650,000 Jones Act jobs. Hey, you look through their literature, and that's how they talk about these jobs, even though specifically fewer than 100,000 are actually related to the law. The law has to do with shipbuilding and who owns it and who crews them. That's it. It doesn't have to do with the dock workers in the ports. It doesn't have to do with the navigational services or port and harbor operations. It's just those several. It doesn't even technically have to. It doesn't even include repairing. Most of the American ships get their ships repaired. Most of the American Jones Act carriers get their ships repaired overseas because the U.S. shipyards are so expensive. So if you were to get rid of the Jones Act, you're not going to get rid of the waterborne transportation industry. Those are jobs that exist. The Jones Act is a law that tries to regulate how the industry behaves, but it's not. The industry is not the Jones Act. It's like saying farmers. Without the Department of Agriculture, there'd be no farmers, or without the Security and Exchange Commission, there'd be no stockbrokers. That's just not how it works. Mm-hmm. That's putting the cart before the horse. And we kind of think that because of the Jones Act, there's other factors, that could explain the decline of jobs, even though they have this 2.6 figure that we came up with in general. There's other factors that could explain that. Consolidation, corporate consolidation, technological advances. A lot of things are being mechanized, automated, and so on. But we think you could probably trace a lot of this to the shipbuilding industry because it's coinciding. To the Jones Act, because it does coincide with the decline in industries that are related specifically to the Jones Act within the waterborne transportation field in general.
Talking with Mark Coleman and Jonathan Hilton of Grassroot Institute of Hawaii on the Jones Act and Hawaii and the effects, if any, if this were to be reformed, this act that's been around since 1920 or even repealed tomorrow. Jonathan, anything to add on what Mark just said?
I'll jump in with one quick fact that I think is really important to note. Mark said that U.S. shipyards get a lot of their money from contracts with the federal government. It's over 75% of their revenue. So if you're talking about maybe let's allow U.S. companies to buy ocean-going cargo ships that are built in other countries, if you did that tomorrow, shipyards in the United States would still have all of those government contracts. So you're talking maybe 20% of the revenue that might go away. And so this is one of those examples of where, if we make a targeted change to the law, repealing the build requirement, which Grassroot's talked about for a long time, what is the practical effect of that? You're going to affect just a handful of shipyards. And, the amount of employment there is going to be relatively low compared to, the industry as a whole.
Yes, especially when you factor in that if American shipping companies such as Matson, Pasha, and whatever, if they could buy ships built overseas, which are as good as any American-built ships, which, by the way, most of those American shipyards are now foreign-owned, and they rely mostly on foreign designs for their shipping, for the ships they build, then that would lower the capital costs for American companies wanting to enter that business. You'd see more shipping companies than just Matson and Pasha serving Hawaii, very likely. You'd see more companies going to other ports they could afford to enter the business. Right now, it costs about 4 to 5 times as much to buy an American ship. And so naturally, not only does that keep out foreign competition, since you have to buy an American ship to serve U.S. ports, but it even keeps out American competition because the capital costs, upfront capital costs, are so high. Matson just spent, or is committed to spending, $1 billion on 3 ships that they could buy for like half the cost, overseas. I'm just throwing that half the cost thing out there, but basically that's 5 times more than what they'd have to pay if they bought those ships overseas. So, the only reason they can do that, and there's no other world in which that economic decision would make sense, except in the world where you have the Jones Act, which basically forces them to do that if they want to buy new ships. And they are due for new ships. Their ships are generally among the oldest in the country. Well, not all of them, but, generally. So Jonathan brings up a great point.
So basically, it sounds like you just want these people to corroborate their numbers when you have just forwarded your numbers, your research, and your data to them. It sounds like that's all you're looking for. And say if we're showing you this and you're showing us that, but you can't back it up, why are we still continuing with this? Why can't we do some sort of reform or actually repeal the Jones Act? And I guess better make it better for customers, because it was bottom line would bring the costs of goods down. Correct?
Yes, that is the bottom line, and that's our goal, right? We're trying to work on a lot of issues at Grassroots to lower the cost of living here in Hawaii, and if we can lower the cost of shipping, that's going to affect everything. It's going to affect food. It's going to affect the cost of materials, which then goes into housing. So yeah, any sort of reform to make ocean transportation to Hawaii less expensive, that's going to be really good for the people in Hawaii.
It's tough to get things reformed, especially when it's been going on for decades, as we know here, and elsewhere too. It's just it takes sometimes a lot of voices to move to get an issue that's been there for so long to get change, even though we talk about change. So what are the chances of the Jones Act being reformed anytime soon? What are the odds?
Well, the odds, I think, have gotten better recently. And, Representative Ed Case from Hawaii is still committed to looking at reforms to the Jones Act. The delegate to the U.S. Congress from Guam, he doesn't have voting power, but he has the power to meet with other representatives. He is in favor of Jones Act reform as well. And some really good news out of Alaska. So U.S. Representative Nick Begich won election in Alaska in 2024. And this is the first time in I think over 50 years that a representative from Alaska has been openly calling for Jones Act reform. And so that's really encouraging, because now you have multiple representatives from these territories and states most affected by the Jones Act who are calling for reform. And so I think that there's a lot of room to hope that there will be action taken maybe in this next Congress or sometime hopefully soon that would either introduce a bill, maybe get a bill to a hearing, or even further, that looks at how the Jones Act applies to all of these states and territories so dependent on getting their goods by ship. Mark?
Yeah, Jonathan's nailed it. The outlook is good, especially you'd think with the Trump administration coming in, especially, that there might be an opening for Jones Act reform. He's talked about it in the past, but you never know what's going to happen politically behind the scenes, what's going on. I know back in the 90s, it was a secret agreement that Reagan had with some of the labor unions that he would not attack the Jones Act in exchange for their support. So as optimistic as I would like, and then during Trump's first administration, when he had the opportunity to, have waivers and even really get rid of the Jones Act, or at least reform it, he never followed through. He had a lot of advisors that wanted him to, but senators from the Jones Act districts, where they build ships and have strong labor unions defending the Jones Act, they prevailed on President Trump to back off. So who knows? I'm not sure what the dynamics are, but the data is certainly leaning in favor of it. And I think our educational efforts through the years have been paying off. We get positive responses all the time from people now about it. More people are aware of it. It just doesn't make any economic sense except for a special few. And I would think progressives, should be jumping on board as much as you would think they would be against this kind of monopoly, duopoly situation that we have that affects consumers and favors, wealthy people. There's all kinds of reasons to be against this. And of course, for our point of view at Grassroots, we think this would be a major way to lower the cost of living, increase economic freedom and accountable government. This is really this is a hidden tax, and we would like you to bring it back to what you said. Yes, we would like to collaborate with people in the maritime industry, even people that have their interests, even those who have a big stake in the continuance of the Jones Act. We'd love it if Matson would see that there actually could be a life after the Jones Act. Matson and Pasha, I think everyone would benefit in the long run. There could be some, shifting pains in the short run for some of these companies, but we're looking at the free market, individual liberty, economic freedom, lower costs of living. It has to be done sometime. This is just ridiculous how long it's been going on.
Mark and Jonathan, would anybody be bringing up, because I haven't in this discussion heard this a possibility, the national security impact? You've already just mentioned right there the economic efficiency of it, and we just mentioned cost to consumers. Are they bringing up national security impact if things were to change with the Jones Act at all?
Yeah, we've talked about the national security effect of the Jones Act in the past. The point of this report was very narrowly focused on the jobs.
Okay.
But just quickly on the national security point of view, I would go back to the shipyard thing. If we allow U.S. companies to buy ships that are built in Japan or South Korea or Europe, and people start buying them there, for U.S. shipyards, they're still going to have military contracts. So the Navy is still going to get its ships built in the United States. We're still going to have some shipyards in the United States that we can turn to in times of crisis to build ships.
Okay. And how about environmental concerns?
And by the way, Johnny, about that issue, about the national security, one point has been brought up. As I mentioned, the Jones Act is a hidden tax. It's not a tax per se in terms of, you pay the federal government directly every year. Mm-hmm. This is a tax that comes out of consumers and not even evenly across the country. It affects some parts of the country, some American citizens, consumers, more than others. Here in Hawaii, the thinking is that, based on the logic of the situation, that we're paying more for the Jones Act than somebody like in Ohio, who knows, or Nebraska. We're doing a study about that too, actually, to see who's paying what. But basically, if you could just assume that if you get most of your imports from a ship, then the Jones Act is the cost that they add to it because of the Jones Act to get our goods to Hawaii. That's a tax on us in Hawaii. Now, others are saying, well, if this is really a national security concern, then why don't you make it a direct tax? Figure out how much this really should be costing us. How much does the Jones Act tax, this hidden tax, really add up to? And then convert that to a general fund situation. Make it part of our taxes. Don't tax certain people in the country, like us here in Hawaii, more for our supposed national security needs than people elsewhere in the country. It has to be even Steven, right? So that would be the argument there, is like, okay, you think it's really important for national security? We haven't disagreed about that. But if you do think that, then at least tax us directly. Don't make it a hidden tax and pretend this is all really wonderful and it's creating 650,000 jobs and whatever. Let's cut to the chase and be real about it.
It's the U.S. maritime jobs disappearing despite protectionist Jones Act. Supporters of the 1920 law seem to be citing numbers that just don't add up. By Mark Coleman and Jonathan Helton, who have been joining me here So the new report challenges the common claim that the Jones Act jobs have been increasing. Check it out. It's featured on the front of their webpage, Grassroot Institute of Hawaii at grassrootinstitute.org. It's right there. You click on it. You page down just a little bit, and it's featured right there. Anything else to add, guys? And I appreciate everything you brought forth so far.
I think.
Well, thank you very much on my behalf. Go ahead. Thank you. I would just say thank you very much, Johnny, on my behalf, at least, for giving us this forum to talk about this morning. We really appreciate you giving us this opportunity. And good morning to all your listeners. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Mark. And go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that the overall takeaway is, if the Jones Act is there to protect the U.S. maritime industry, we have to ask, honest questions about whether or not it's doing that. The report suggests that that might not be the case, and we would welcome anybody who supports the Jones Act, who works in the maritime industry, to come and have conversation about this, because it's only, through working together with people that we're going to see any sort of progress on this or any other issue.
You're here.
All right, folks, once again, it's grassrootinstitute.org. You can find out more about all of their research, but this one in general, new report challenging the common claim that the Jones Act jobs have been increasing. The numbers just don't add up, by Mark Coleman and Jonathan Helton. Gentlemen, it's been great listening to your wisdom, and look forward down the road in the next year to bringing forward more discussions very pertinent to the state of Hawaii here. Thanks, Mark and Jonathan, and have a great weekend, and the merriest of Christmas and the happiest of New Year's.
Likewise, Johnny. Happy New Year.
And Merry Christmas to everyone and a Happy New Year.